A few years ago, a worker noticed something strange. Nothing dramatic. No email, no warning, no meeting. But somehow, the opportunities stopped coming. The good shifts became less frequent. The high-value work started going elsewhere. The pay didn't collapse overnight. It just slowly became harder to earn what they used to earn. At first, they blamed themselves. Maybe they weren't working hard enough. Maybe they had become less productive. Maybe they were doing something wrong. So they worked harder, nothing changed. Then they tried working longer hours, still nothing. And that's when they started asking a question that millions of workers eventually ask. Who is actually making these decisions? Because nobody had ever sat them down and explained what and why things had changed. Yet something clearly had. And the answer turned out to be much stranger than they expected. Because the person making the decision wasn't necessarily a person. Most people think they understand how work works. You show up, you do your job, someone evaluates your performance, and you get rewarded. Simple, fair, and understandable. Well, at least on paper. But here's something worth thinking about. How many important decisions about your working life are actually explained to you? Not announced, but explained. I mean, why did one employee get promoted over other? Why did one worker receive better opportunities? Why did someone else's income suddenly increase? Most of the time, people only see the outcome, not the process, and that's where our story begins. Because hidden behind many modern workplaces is something most people never think about. Not because it's secret, because it's invisible. Imagine you're managing only 10 employees. You probably know all of them. You know who's reliable, who's struggling, who's improving, who's having a rough week. Now imagine looking after employees in the range of 10,000. Suddenly, that becomes impossible. No human can track everything. No human can process that much information, which in turn creates a problem. Companies need decisions, but there are too many decisions for humans to make alone. And that's where systems entered the picture. Not evil, not secret, just systems. Tools designed to organize information, measure performance, identify patterns, and recommend actions. Sounds simple enough until those recommendations start influencing real outcomes. This is the stage where most people imagine some futuristic artificial intelligence controlling everything. However, the reality is much less dramatic and far more powerful because these systems don't even need complete control. The only thing they need is influence. Think about a recommendation on Netflix. Netflix doesn't force you to watch anything. It simply influences what you watch and what you watch next. Now apply that same idea to work. A recommendation about performance, about efficiency, about scheduling, about pay, about promotion. Nobody is forcing these decisions, but the recommendation exists. And recommendations have a funny habit of becoming a reality, especially when they're backed by data. Every workplace measures something, and sometimes it's too many things. Response times, sales numbers, customer ratings, attendance, output, completion rates, efficiency. The details vary, but the principle stays the same. Measure, compare, and rank. And once ranking begins, something interesting happens. People start competing for a score they don't even fully understand. Not because they're told to, because the system rewards it. More visibility, more opportunities, more recognition, and better outcomes. The worker never sees the entire scoreboard, but they can still feel its effects. Now this is where things become interesting. Imagine two equally talented workers. Same effort, same skill, same commitment. However, one receives slightly better opportunities early on. Nothing major, just slightly better better projects, better timing, and therefore better visibility. Eventually, the numbers starts to improve, and those numbers starts to unlock further opportunities, which create even stronger numbers, which then unlock even more opportunities. As a result, a small advantage slowly becomes a large one. Not because somebody planned it, it's because systems tend to reinforce existing patterns, and once that loop starts, it can become surprisingly difficult to notice. For years, this process existed quietly. Then something happened. Millions of workers suddenly began interacting with systems directly. Apps, platforms, gig work. For the first time, workers could actually watch decisions happening in real time. Assignments appeared, pricing changed, opportunities shifted. The rules seemed to evolve constantly, and many people realized something important. The system wasn't just tracking what workers did, it was affecting what happened to them. That realization spread far beyond gig work, because if systems could influence outcomes there, then what about everywhere else? Here's the truth. Most modern workplaces aren't replacing human decision, because at the end of the day, it's the people who will have a final say on any matter. But the system still helps decide what those people see, what information reaches them, what gets their attention, and what gets left out. To keep it short, long before a decision is made, the system is already influencing it. The manager still exists, the supervisor still exists, the executive still exists, but increasingly they're making decisions using information that has already been processed by systems. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the information is filtered, how much influence does the filter have? The biggest change isn't the technology, it's visibility. Because people can accept almost any outcome if they understand how it happened. What frustrates people is uncertainty, not knowing why, not knowing what has changed, not knowing which factors mattered, and systems often create that exact feeling, not because they're malicious, but because they're complicated, and the more complicated the process becomes, the harder it is to explain. And the harder it becomes to explain, the more invisible it starts to feel. So let's return to the question we started with. The worker who couldn't understand why everything suddenly changed. Who made the decision? The manager? Partly. The company? Partly. The market? Partly. But increasingly, another participant is heavily involved. A participant that never attends meetings, never shakes hands, and never explains itself. A system, not the sole decision maker, but a powerful influence on countless decisions. And perhaps that's the most important shift happening in modern work. Because the biggest changes rarely arrive with an announcement. They always arrive quietly. One recommendation, one metric, one ranking, one update at a time. Until eventually, the system becomes part of everyday life, and most people never realize when it happened. The next time something changes at work, a promotion, a raise, a performance review, or a new opportunity, ask yourself one simple question: who actually made that decision? And more importantly, how would you know?